Chapter 8, Starry Night in Our Window. In the starry nights, I sought your presence, without finding it. Until one day I had you by my side contemplating the sky. Will it be an illusion of the spirits of the night or a beautiful reality? Will this happiness last long? Laizen. But what are you doing here? Victoria asked quietly, not to wake Lord Melbourne, as she closed the door slowly. I wanted to get in to wake you up, Your Majesty, but Miss Scarrett advised me to wait for you would left the bedroom, Laizen replied quietly, as if she were talking about the most normal thing in the world. With good judgment. Laizen, now I'm a married woman and I sleep with my husband, you cannot enter my bedroom like you did when I was single, Victoria said a little scandalized. I see, well I suppose Your Majesty will want us to help you clean and dress, that will remain the same. Are not you wearing your nightgown, ma'am? Laizen replied, arching an eyebrow as she saw Victoria's body through the half-open dressing gown. Victoria closed her robe more to cover herself better, while she saw the face of Miss Scarrett who was blushing. Victoria also blushed. Come on, Laizen. I have to get ready for breakfast. Do not bother Lord Melbourne, he's exhausted, Victoria said hurried to Laizen. I understand, Your Majesty, replied Laizen blankly. After a while Victoria finished cleaning herself, and was finishing dressing with the help of Laizen and Miss Scarrett. Then Laizen noticed that Victoria was walking a little strange. Is something wrong, Your Majesty? I see you walking with some difficulty, Laizen asked innocently. It hurts a little when I walk today, Victoria answered with some naivety. Scarrett could not help laughing, though she quickly covered her mouth with one hand and ducked her head in embarrassment at the glance of Laizen and Victoria. Laizen cast her disgusted gaze upon Miss Scarrett, and then turned to look to Victoria, and she saw that Victoria's face was red like a tomato and a smile like a little girl who had just committed a mischief, also with a bright and funny look. Die Jungen Frauen von heute haben keine Bescheidenheit. The young women of today have no modesty, said Laizen in German language. Laizen, hör auf! Laizen, stop! Victoria exclaimed, also in German, and do not speak German, I told you, Victoria scolded. Excuse me, Your Majesty, said Laizen, Miss Scarrett, go to the kitchen to tell that Queen will descend in a few minutes, to have breakfast ready, Laizen said, addressing Scarrett. Yes, Baroness. With your permission, Your Majesty, Scarrett said with a slight bow to Victoria, and went to carry out the order. Victoria turned to Laizen and smiled. Then she took Laizen by the hand. Laizen, do not be in a bad mood. Do not you see that I'm happy as never in my life? Victoria said and grabbed Laizen as if it were her dance partner, I'm so happy, that I could dance all day. She added turning Laizen in a small dance, but she quickly gave up with a gesture of pain. Laizen could not help but laugh, feeling joy at seeing her dear Victoria so happy. I believe you, Your Majesty. I see you as happy as when you were a little girl, and you were receiving gifts on your birthday or Christmas. And I am glad to see you so happy, Laizen replied with sincere emotion. I know, my dear Laizen. Victoria said kissing the back of a hand of Laizen, now I have everything I need in my life, all the people I love. Added Victoria. When Victoria went to her bedroom to see if Lord Melbourne was still sleeping, she found him finishing cleaning himself and getting ready to get dressed. Both kissed with passion and had to make an effort to restrain themselves, and not to return to bed without eating. They managed to go down to breakfast, although at the table did not stop exchanging silly or mischievous looks, and grab the hand tenderly and desire. The rest of the day was spent between meals, laughter, horseback riding on the grounds of the castle and kisses, lots of kisses. When night came, they were both anxious to the matrimonial bedroom to continue with their honeymoon. Victoria was standing, dressed only in another nightgown, and Lord Melbourne approached her from behind, and began to kiss the nape of her neck as he wrapped his arms around her. Lord Melbourne's lips came down and kissed Victoria's neck as she closed her eyes and made a gesture of pleasure. With one hand, Lord Melbourne pressed her breasts to Victoria, while with the other hand he stroked her womb over the fabric of her nightgown. Then Lord Melbourne grabbed the nightgown and removed Victoria by the head, leaving her totally naked, still standing. He stood still behind her, and now that Victoria was totally naked, Lord Melbourne stroked the girl's body with his big hands. With one hand he kept stroking and squeezing his wife's breasts, and the other hand descended to Victoria's crotch, and his fingers rummaged in her intimacy. Victoria twisted in his arms and with one hand clung to her husband's hair, turning her head to kiss the lips of Lord Melbourne. He grabbed her and carried her to the bed, and after laying her on her back, Lord Melbourne took off his nightshirt in a hurry and his breeches, and being totally naked, he stood above her. Desperately Lord Melbourne kissed her, and Victoria kissed him with passion. They both embraced, and then Lord Melbourne again penetrated her. On this occasion Lord Melbourne made love to her with more energy, with more passion, and worrying a little less to hurt her, although he was still gentle. Victoria gasped, and her moans of pleasure rose, almost turned into screams. They both rolled over on the feather mattress until they reached the climax. Then they both laughed and kissed. "Lord M. How many times are you going to honor your queen tonight?" Victoria said with mischief and a cheerful laugh. "Should I understand what you're challenging me to, ma'am?" Lord Melbourne replied with a lascivious grin as he lay still on her. "I don't know, Lord M. What do you think?" She answered excitedly. "I think it's a challenge you're going to regret, ma'am." Lord Melbourne exclaimed and began to kiss her with frenzy and nibble on her neck, tickling her, while Victoria laughed out loud. The laughter was soon replaced by groans and gasps of pleasure. The following weeks Lord Melbourne and Victoria loved each other almost every night with equal or greater passion, on Buckingham, Brocket Hall, or Windsor. When they were in Buckingham Palace, in Queen's bedroom, now the royal couple's bedroom, the nights of passion between Lord Melbourne and Victoria were responsible for Lazon having to change rooms, and leaving the one next to Victoria's bedroom door. For the noises of pleasure of the newly married couple, especially Victoria's moans, even though Lord Melbourne sometimes covered her mouth with his hand, did not let poor Baroness sleep. And so came the day that Lord Melbourne and Victoria walked, she holding his arm, by the very side of the gardens of Brocket Hall where Lord Melbourne rejected Victoria's declaration of love. Like that day, a flock of crows flew before them, and the pair halted their walk, and Lord Melbourne stared at them, while Victoria smiled at her brand new husband. "You and your blessed crows," Victoria said with a sweet chuckle. "The habits of a man seldom change, ma'am," Lord Melbourne answered with an amused smile. "Yours have changed a little, Lord M, at least you do not wake up in your library, sleeping in a chair, after drinking brandy," Victoria said mockingly. "It's just that I now have a powerful motivation to don on my bed, a beautiful and young wife," Lord Melbourne replied with a look of desire and a seductive smile. Victoria blushed and with a smile of shame, looked away. "This place was always one of my favourites, until the day I rejected your declaration of love. That day was the most odious place in the world for me," said Lord Melbourne sadly as he recalled. "You hurt me a lot that day," Victoria said in a sad voice, as if the memories in her mind still ached, as if they had just happened. Lord Melbourne put his hands on his wife's shoulders and he spun her to face her, meeting her directly in the eyes. "I've never asked you to forgive me for that day, Victoria. I would never make you suffer, I prefer," Lord Melbourne said in a tone of sad and sincere apology. "Shhh." Victoria emitted with her lips, for to silence him, as she placed her delicate index finger on Lord Melbourne's lips, "I know it was so painful for you as for me. And since then you have vindicated yourself, making me the happiest woman in the world." Lord Melbourne smiled and bent his head to give her a sweet kiss on the lips, and then he pressed her against his body, and she closed her eyes as she felt her husband's strong chest pressed against her face. They were a few moments enjoying in silence, until Victoria pulled away a little to see her husband in the eyes. "I have something to tell you, William," Victoria said with bright eyes and cheerful and excited tone. "What is it, my love?" asked Lord Melbourne, intrigued and glad to see the emotion on his wife's face as he stroked Victoria's cheek with the palm of one hand. "Lord M. I'm pregnant!" Victoria exclaimed, quite excited, with a charming smile and damp eyes. Lord Melbourne needed a moment to absorb what he had heard, then he looked like an idiot, and then that idiot face lit up with a gesture of joy, deep emotion, with a huge smile. "Victory, are you sure?" Lord Melbourne mumbled, almost in shock. "Yes, this morning, before I left Buckingham, the doctor confirmed it to me," Victoria replied. Lord Melbourne embraced her excitedly, like a little boy who meets with his mother after months of absence. Later, in a fit that would have been unthinkable in him only a few months before, holding Victoria by the sides of her torso, he lifted a little from the floor her small body, as if it were a doll, between laughter of Victoria and him. Then Lord Melbourne hugged her tightly and kissed her mouth, without Victoria's feet touching the floor. Finally he lowered her slowly, and tenderly stroked her cheeks as a tear fell from Lord Melbourne's eyes. "Victoria, my Victoria! I have no words to tell you what I feel. Again, you have made me the happiest man in the world," said Lord Melbourne, very touched. "And I'm glad to see your emotion, my beloved Lord M," Victoria said, her voice broken with emotion. "And you, are you glad to be a mother?" asked Lord Melbourne, as he wiped a tear from Victoria with the back of his hand. "I wish to be mother, of course, and especially of your children, Lord M, but I confess that I am somewhat afraid, for what happened to my deceased cousin, Charlotte, and other women who have died giving birth," Victoria confessed, with fear in her voice and in the gesture of her face. Lord Melbourne's face paled, and in his gesture also the fear was felt. But then he tried to calm down, for to give strength to his wife. "Victoria, of course there is risk, but in most cases women give birth and recover quite well. The worst happens in the minority of cases. You are the queen of the richest and most powerful country in the world, you can have the best doctors and the best treatments that money can buy, which the rest of women cannot have. You have a lot of people to take care of you, people who love you, like Lazan or your mother, your dear mother who would like to cross me with a sword but who loves you with passion," said Lord Melbourne, causing laughter to Victoria, "and you have me, my love. I'll take care of you as if you were the most valuable and fragile in the world, I'll spoil you, I'll watch you every minute of the day, I will protect to you so much that I'm going to become annoying and unbearable, and you're going to end up sick." He added with a sweet smile and more laughter from Victoria, "I'm going to take care of both and I will not let anything bad happen to them, I swear to God and my late son," Lord Melbourne concluded, stroking Victoria's still flat belly, as if he could feel the child just beginning to grow in his wife's gut. Victoria placed her small right hand on the large hand of her husband, who caressed her belly. "But I'm going to get fat and ugly, and maybe my body will not be the same again. Am I going to like you as much as I am now?" Victoria asked with naivety and mild anguish. "Victoria, do not be silly. I'm anxious to see you with your big belly, because you're going to look very pretty. You will be the pregnant most beautiful and sweet in the world, and when you give birth to the baby your body will be wonderful. In any case, you'll never get me to stop wishing you, because I'm absolutely in love with you forever. So much so that the only thing I regret is the abstinence we will have to do during the last months of your pregnancy," said tenderly Lord Melbourne, while with one hand he continued to caress her belly and with the other hand stroked the face of his wife. "Only during the last months? So, during the first few months, can we have marital life?" Victoria asked excitedly. "Of course. For my fortune, because I could not bear to be 9 months without being intimate with you," answered Lord Melbourne, amusing and seductive, honestly. "Me neither. I've gotten very accustomed to your caresses at night," Victoria replied, flushed, but with a seductive and coquettish air. "And I give to you, ma'am," he said, kissing her, a deep and passionate kiss. At that moment Dash appeared, cheerful, sniffing and licking the legs of Victoria and Lord Melbourne. "Dash also loves Brocket Hall, as much as I do," Victoria said cheerfully as she lifted the dog from the floor and the animal licked its face. "You love House of Papa. True, handsome?" she added with a smile. "Our boy is a good boy," replied Lord Melbourne affectionately and cheerfully as he stroked the dog's head and he let the animal lick his face. "Let's go to the house, Mrs. Melbourne, I want to toast for the good news," he added as he circled Victoria's shoulders with his arm, and affectionately led her toward the house. And so the three marched into the house, Dash in the arms of Victoria, and Lord Melbourne with his arm on the shoulders of his wife, and she leaning her head on his body. Thus passed the months, with Victoria suffering a lot by the discomforts of the pregnancy, which caused to her some outbursts of anguish and bad mood. But her condition would have been far worse, had it not been for the infinite patience and great affection Lord Melbourne showed to her, which always had the right words and gestures of love and tenderness to rescue her from bitterness and fear. Seldom had people seen such a loving and protective husband with his pregnant wife. One night, in the final stage of her pregnancy, Victoria was at the window of her bedroom in Buckingham Palace, contemplating a wonderful starry firmament with the telescope that in one of her birthday, Lord Melbourne gave to her, as she used to do many nights when she slept alone, with the difference that she was now sitting on the legs of Lord Melbourne, who he was glued to the window. Victoria was only wearing a nightgown, and Lord Melbourne was also in his nightclothes, and with a dressing gown. She closed the telescope, with a deep sigh, and laid her back on her husband's lap. "Do you remember when you gave me this telescope, Lord M?" Victoria asked with nostalgia. "How can I forget it, Victoria? It was that birthday of yours, and from what Emma told me at the time you did not receive it with much emotion," said Lord Melbourne amusedly as he kissed Victoria in the back of one ear. "I was angry with you because you wanted to leave me," Victoria blamed him slightly, in an ironic tone, as she made a gesture of pleasure at her husband's kisses behind her ear. "If for abandoning it is understood to fulfill my constitutional duty to cede power to the opposition, when I understand that Parliament does not support my government with a large enough majority to continue to govern, and out of loyalty to my Queen I urge her to fulfill her obligation and commission the formation of the government to the Leader of the Opposition," said Lord Melbourne mockingly. "Yes, I know, William, you wanted to fulfill your duty with the Constitution and above all you wanted to protect me, you do not have to repeat it to me, anyway. More than angry I was sad, because I did not want to lose you, I was afraid you'd leave from me. But in fact the gift made me very happy, it was the most beautiful gift had they done to me for my birthday until then. And since that day I spent every night watching the sky before I went to bed, for a long time. But do you know what I thought when I saw the starry sky every night?" Victoria said to him. "No, but I'd like to know, Victoria," he replied with genuine curiosity. "I wondered what you would be doing right then, where you would be. I was wondering what you would be thinking, and sometimes, I fantasized about having a vision about the stars and being able to see through my telescope that you would be doing right then," Victoria said, shaken to remember. "I can tell you now, every night I spent in my office in Dover House or my library in Brocket Hall, and after I finished working on government affairs, I would sit in a soft chair with a bottle of good brandy, and I served me one drink after another until I fell asleep, but what no one knew, is what I thought every night before falling asleep. Since I met you, I only thought about you every night. Like you, I wondered every night that you would be doing at that moment, whether you would be sleeping or reading, or playing with Dash, and I would have given anything to see you at that moment. You were looking for me in the stars, I was looking for you on the surface of the brandy in my glass. And I felt like a fool, because I was falling in love with you, a girl who was young enough to be my daughter, who was as beautiful and perfect as an angel, and to top it off, it was the Queen. I felt like an old fool," Lord Melbourne said truthfully. "The two of us were fools, because I felt that you were too handsome, charming and perfect, a man too mature, and that you did not correspond to my feelings because you looked very little girl me, and maybe, you did not even find me attractive. How wrong we were! She said, turning her head to give him a tender kiss on the lips, and then she let himself rest completely on him. So much has happened since then. Yes, that's true. For example, you have a belly as a hype, said Lord Melbourne teasingly, stroking Victoria's huge pregnant belly. Shut up, fool! Victoria protested, giving him a blow with the fist in the arm. You know that I am very sensible with the subject of my fatness in this state. Why? You look very cute. I love to see you like this, he said cheerfully. You try to have such a big belly, to bear such a heavy weight. And above all to endure such terrible ailments every day. Sometimes I think I'm going to explode like a balloon. But it also has its advantages, said Lord Melbourne, caressing Victoria's breasts above the fabric of her nightgown. He sensed like they had grown in size. I'm glad I'm not the only one suffering. You're suffering from abstinence, even if it's a shared suffering, Victoria said with a laugh. Lord Melbourne laughed, then kissed her again. Then they both stared at the sky. The starry sky is beautiful, magnificent, but I do not have to seek happiness in the stars, because everything I love and need I have it right now in my arms, Lord Melbourne said dreamily as he narrowing to Victoria with one arm and the hand of the other arm rested on her huge belly. Now I would only ask as shooting star, that everything goes well, and my child and my wife are healthy and happy after childbirth, he added, and his voice broke at the end. We will be fine, my love, so that you embrace to us with your strong arms, replied Victoria reassuringly, understanding that her husband was now in need of encouragement. And you did not want to ask the shooting star for another wish? Do you want it to be a boy or a girl? I do not care, really. If it were a girl, I'm sure she'll be as beautiful as her mother, just as charming and sweet. And if it were a boy? I hope he is more handsome than his father, but in any case I am sure he will be gallant because he carries the blood of his mother, said Lord Melbourne modestly, and at the same time flattering with his wife. Fool! If it is a boy, will be handsome for his father, who is such an attractive man. I would love, he would have your eyes and his face resemble yours, and have a body like yours, so tall, strong and virile, replied Victoria, seductively flattering, while stroking the arms of her husband around her, causing Lord Melbourne bristled the hairs on his body, reminding him of the feeling that Victoria was growing more fiery in bed, something that he was going crazy with pleasure. And if it is a girl, it will be more beautiful than me, because it will bring out the best of both. I hope that it take your height, so that it does not suffer the complexes of its mother to be one small woman, Victoria laughed. I find the small women very interesting. Particularly one, replied Lord Melbourne with desire, kissing and nibbling on Victoria's neck. I'm afraid I'm going to be pregnant many times, Victoria said in a tone of pleasure, closing her eyes. Do you remember your doll 123? The day we met. I'd love to have the same number of babies, Lord Melbourne said mockingly. God, no, have mercy on me! Victoria exclaimed with laughter. Both laughed, then stared at the starry sky. Starry nights at our window, many nights like this, that's all I ask of life, Victoria said, her eyes moist and the emotion in her voice. Me too, ma'am, shall I take you to bed? He asked, lovingly. Yes. Lord Melbourne rose, carrying Victoria like a baby, as she wrapped her arms around his neck. She kissed him on the lips, and then looked into his eyes. I love you, Lord M., Victoria said with intensity in her voice and eyes. And I love you, Victoria, Lord Melbourne answered with the same intensity, then kissed her. He laid her carefully on the bed, then lay down next to his pregnant wife. They both fell asleep hugged, while the telescope was resting on the window, and through it the starry sky was still visible. A couple of weeks later Victoria was carrying in her arms the first daughter of the couple, Princess Victoria Adelaide Mary Louisa, and to her side was Lord Melbourne, as proud father and husband, sitting on the bed and wrapping his arm around shoulders of Victoria, while his fingers delicately caressed the cheeks of his newborn daughter. It was the beginning of the long offspring of Queen Victoria and her husband Lord Melbourne, the beginning of a long and happy life together. Note: I thank all those who have liked my story. Evidently in my story I have created a fictional version of the history, quite different from the real history. Obviously beginning with the fact that in my story Queen Victoria marries Lord Melbourne instead of Prince Albert, which I think most viewers of the first season of the Victoria series wish we would have been what happened in real life, for to be able to see it in the televised fiction. I used the date and place of Victoria's marriage to Albert, but changing Albert for Lord Melbourne. The attempted against the life of the Queen Victoria related at the beginning of the story did not occur in the real life of the historical person, although it is rigorously certain that the Queen suffered several attacks like the one that is related in the last episode of the first season. As to the credibility of a regicide potential entering Buckingham Palace, it should be remembered that as early as July 9, 1982, an intruder named Michael Fagan managed to sneak into Buckingham and reach the bedroom of the Queen Elizabeth II, and sit in the Queen's bed and even talk to her. If that happened in a time of electronic alarms and more vigilance, it is not so far-fetched to imagine an assassination attempt against Queen Victoria in Buckingham in 1839. Another point in which I have changed the history in a fictitious way is to anticipate in almost 2 years the end of the last Lord Melbourne government and therefore its replacement by the Conservative Robert Peel in the position of Prime Minister and by Lord John Russell as leader of the Whig Party.